Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort, a local Champaign-Urbana peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook. We're recording this at midday on Tuesday, May 28th, in the studios of Urbana Public Television. While we Americans are preoccupied with posturing presidential politics, our government is killing people around the world. International polls show that it's the United States, not Russia, China, Iran, or even Israel, that is by far the most feared government in the world. And that's not surprising. Our government today is making war, killing people, in 8 countries, and U.S. war provocations against Russia and China risk a wider, even a nuclear war. Although most Americans are not aware of it, the U.S. government is bombing Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. We're doing so principally to control the flow of oil out of the Mideast and North Africa, which the U.S. uses as a weapon against its economic rivals from Germany to China. The ongoing U.S. drone assassination program, called the most extreme terrorist campaign of modern times, has killed thousands of people, including American citizens, purposely, not by accident, and hundreds of children. More than 250,000 American troops are stationed at 1,000 U.S. bases on foreign soil, most of them surrounding Russia and China. The 70,000 U.S. troops in the Special Operations Command are active in 3/4 of the countries of the world. Their activities have included kidnapping, the U.S. government calls it rendition, torture, and murder. The U.S. is torturing the people of Venezuela and Iran, the countries with 2 countries with large reserves of oil, in order to overthrow their governments, which aren't following orders from Washington. Since 1945, the United States has killed more than 20 million people in wars in Korea, Vietnam, Latin America, the Mideast, and elsewhere, designed to maintain the worldwide economic dominance that the U.S. inherited at the end of World War II for the American 1%. It's shamefully the basis of U.S. foreign policy to use war and the threats of war to retard the economic development of Russia and China as competitors to American control of the world economy. From U.S. support for a fascist coup in Ukraine to U.S. naval provocations in the South China Sea and huge NATO military exercises in Eastern Europe. The rest of the world recognizes that the U.S. government is what Martin Luther King called it long ago, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. With other peace groups around the world, we call upon the President and our government to close all foreign military bases, bring all U.S. troops and weapons home, and provide social supports, including free medical care, education, and a universal basic income, for Americans who've been made poor by generations of our government's wars. Our group, the Anti-War, Anti-Racism Effort, is on Facebook at Aware of Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. We want to argue that Trump is not the problem. American war-making is. American war-making obviously predates the Trump administration, and in fact, Trump's ambiguity on U.S. war-making, unlike Clinton, helped make him president. General Wesley Clark, the very model of a modern major general who conducted the first Clinton's campaign against Yugoslavia, the war against Yugoslavia, in an interview with Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! 12 years ago, said, and I'm quoting here, "There's a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off with Iran." Now remember, this is Wesley Clark talking on television a dozen years ago, long before even the invasion of Iraq. Amy Goodman said, well, that's not that's not quite right. This was Wesley Clark describing the situation in the years after the invasion of Iraq, but long before the present scheme of war making that we see around the world that he predicted from this Pentagon plan that he's quoting. Go through the countries again, said Amy Goodman. Clark says, well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and back to Iran. The U.S. is clearly following that plan, whatever the source of Clark's information was. But isn't the current form of provoking wars rather than attacking directly new for the United States? This clandestine construction of excuses for military action in these countries. That's not quite the case if we think about American history. In fact, and here's an account from a suspect source, but one that is accurately describing how the U.S. has engineered its way into regime change wars. This is from the Washington Institute for Near Eastern Policy, a longtime D.C. Think tank that's really an Israeli lobby front. The talk was called, or the discussion was called, and I quote, "How to Build U.S.-Israeli Coordination on Preventing an Iranian Nuclear Breakout," close quote. The cover story has always been that the U.S. is simply trying to stop Iran from making a nuclear weapon. Of course, Iran has said all along it's not making a nuclear weapon, and even American intelligence services agreed that that's the case. But this is a discussion at this think tank with Patrick Clausen, David Makovsky, and Dennis Ross. If you've been paying any attention to the American-Israeli or the work of the Israeli lobby in America, those names will be familiar. But this discussion is particularly apropos, I think. Clausen says, "I frankly think that crisis initiation," interesting term, "is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us into war with Iran." Which leads me to conclude that if in fact compromise is not accompanying the traditional way America gets to war, is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David Makovsky, one of his other panel members, had mentioned. That's a commonplace among American historians now. You might recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people think that President Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall we had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You might recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out a whole army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander of Fort Sumter to do exactly the thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if in fact the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. He holds out, in this discussion, he holds out his arms, shrugs his shoulder, and gestures saying, well, I don't know. Who would know why? Now, this is quite an amazing account. What he's talking about here is the very real historical fact that the U.S. has engineered its entrance into 19th and 20th century wars by trying to get the other fellow to strike the first blow, as they said. And they've done that successfully time and again, even including things like Pearl Harbor. That's not in the American mythology, but here we have a warmonger, Patrick Lawson, from a Washington think tank, just taking it for granted that all of those things are true, and they are. Our chief researcher, Jeff Nicholson, who has done a marvelous job of pulling together this material. You can find the links on the Facebook page for Aware on the Air. Writes that Graham Elwood is a stand-up comic and part of Jimmy Dore's crew. Jimmy Dore has a show, a cable show, a YouTube show on politics. Here's their reaction on hearing this amazing, if quite accurate, account from Patrick Lawson. Graham Elwood says, "That's a mob threat. That's exactly a mob threat." And he, in the show, he assumes a Italian mobster voice. "Oh, Jimmy, it'd be a real shame if you fell down a flight of stairs. You know what I mean? Submarines fall down all the time. You know what I mean? They trip and fall, they hit their head, and there's no submarine. Know what I mean?" Jimmy Dore, who falls into the stereotypical Italian mobster accent to carry on the conversation, says, "That's a nice country you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. That's all I'm saying. I mean, you got some lovely people in your country. I'd hate to see them get their heads blown off or whatever." This is all about American plans, openly admitted here, about trying to provoke war with Iran. You know, Elwood returns, "You know what I mean? That'd be awful if you accidentally drone striked a nice, lovely country like that because they didn't pay their things on time. You know what I mean?" Jeff Nicholson comments, which brings me to repeat a point I made about Democratic Party Representative Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii. The regime change war she says she hates can be carried out with the drones she has said she approves using. That's your so-called anti-war candidate, Representative Tulsi Gabbard. And there's a link to Gabbard's interview about drones and drone war that Jeff has provided us with. Jeff and I disagree a bit on the analysis of Tulsi Gabbard, maybe just wishful thinking on my part, but it seems to me that she's the only one of the Democratic presidential contenders who has any right whatsoever to speak of themselves as anti-war, Jeff denies that even that's the case, that she is as bad as the rest of them. I hope he's wrong. There's another candidate for the Democratic nomination, who's more mainstream, but also is open, I think, to the same objections to the others of being at least ambiguous about American war making. That's being too gentle. Elizabeth Warren is clearly a supporter of American war making. There was Jeff Nicholson here has a reaction to a recent Jacobin article. Jacobin is the left liberal magazine from New York that is very much worth reading, usually, if one understands where its politics are coming from. The article that's being referred to had to do with Elizabeth Warren's refusal to go on Fox News Town Hall Forum. Question of Warren's position, and indeed Fox News' position, is at stake here. Representative Gabbard, Tulsi Gabbard, says, of course, she would go on to Fox News and talk about the issues, as Warren refused to do. Gabbard said, and I quote, "I'll sit down with anyone, anywhere to help address the threats and challenges facing our nation today." That's right, anyone, including Fox News. We're more than a year from the general election, but already other Democratic presidential candidates have refused to attend Fox News town halls and debates. Whether I agree with their views or not, Fox News viewers are real people that I, as president, will commit to serving. So I'm not interested in playing partisan games or trying to score political points. I'm running for president to put the interests of the people first, ahead of profit and ahead of political convenience, close quote. That's Tulsi Gabbard saying that, of course, she'll talk to Fox News, as Elizabeth Warren refused to do. An article in Jacobin, the journal I just mentioned, says that Elizabeth Warren should have gone on Fox News Town Hall Forum. I think this is the correct conclusion, but the author of this article, Megan Day, underplays the problem. Here's the closest she gets to the truth of why Warren refused Fox News' invitation to a televised town hall forum like the one Senator Sanders recently did. Quote, "It's possible that this is simply a tidy post hoc justification, and Warren actually doesn't want to go on Fox for immediate strategic reasons, perhaps worrying that she would be hit with difficult or unfair questions and would underperform." Close quote. The ridiculously long explanation by Warren of why she didn't go on Fox News goes like this. Quote, this is Elizabeth Warren now explaining why Fox News is beyond the limit. Quote, "I love town halls. I've done more than 70 since January, and I'm glad to have a television audience be part of them. Fox News has invited me to do a town hall, but I'm turning them down. Here's why. Fox News is a hate-for-profit racket that gives a megaphone to racists and conspiracists. It's designed to turn us against each other, risking life and death consequences, to provide cover for the corruption that's rotting our government and hollowing out our middle class. Hate for profit works only if there's profit, so Fox News balances a mix of bigotry, racism, and outright lies with enough legit journalism to make the claim to advertisers that it's a reputable news outlet. It's all about dragging in ad money, big ad money. But Fox News is struggling as more and more advertisers pull out of their hate-filled space. A Democratic town hall gives the Fox News sales team a way to tell potential sponsors it's safe to buy ads on Fox, no harm to their brand or reputation. Here's one place we can fight back. I won't ask millions of Democratic primary voters to tune into an outlet that profits from racism and hate in order to see our candidates, especially when Fox will make even more money adding our valuable audience to their ratings numbers. I'm running a campaign to reach all Americans. Don't mind the contradiction in Warren's account here. I take questions from the press and voters everywhere I go. I've already held town halls in 17 states and Puerto Rico, including West Virginia, Ohio, Georgia, Utah, Tennessee, Texas, Colorado, Mississippi, and Alabama. I've done 57 media avails and 131 interviews, taking over 1,100 questions from press just since January. Fox News is welcome to come to my events, just like any other outlet. But a Fox News town hall adds money to the hate-for-profit machine, to which I say, I'll pass. Close quote. Now, to unpack that in a reasonable fashion would see that any sense in it, insofar as there is any, would apply also to all other mainstream media, corporate-based media in this country. But that's not what Warren is concerned about. Most of Warren's justification, says Jeff, is a self-serving declaration about where she's been in town hall forums and some dismissive lines about why she doesn't like Fox News. A parenthesis here, this gets stranger and stranger these days as one of the Fox News headliners, Tucker Carlson, keeps breaking out of the form and talking sense on one thing and another. We might review that at one point, but what we have here is an account of American corporate media that is crumbling in various ways. It's falling apart. And that's the best reason, it seems to me, for someone like Warren to take advantage of it if she can. This really comes down to her denying herself to do what Senator Sanders did, get a very highly watched show by saying something that isn't, quote, hate for profit, Bringing up Fox News, quote, bigotry, racism, and outright lies, close quote, is a dodge because if their previous town hall forums are any sense of what they do in these town hall shows, Fox News, to their credit, gives the invited speaker plenty of time to say what they have to say. Sanders' town hall forum is not fairly characterized as featuring bigotry, racism, and outright lies, and I presume neither would Warren's. Warren says she's running a campaign to reach all Americans, except apparently those poor Americans that watch Fox News regularly. Jacobin pointed out that Fox News viewers have the lowest average income of any major news network or outlet. This is wonderful stuff. I mean, you figure the sorts of surveys and attention that goes into coming up with a statistic like that, which must have some basic in fact, because people are buying and selling that information. The uneasiness of the mainstream media and their pose that all views are represented is indicated here, I think. And, you know, one may not be quite wrong in taking some pleasure in seeing their consternation. Jeff Nicholson writes, I figure that Dave's Jacobin article is seriously downplaying the problem here. I think the real issue is that Senator Warren knows how easily her neoliberal and neoconservative shtick will be exposed if she's put to mildly challenging questioning, which is what she's likely to get on Fox News. I also suspect that she saw Senator Sanders' Fox News town hall forum, and she knows that the audience will not necessarily go along with her where she needs them to. Remember how in Sanders' forum, the audience enthusiastically confirmed that they'd give up their employer-based health care for a universal single-payer health care plan, that is, Medicare for all, much to the chagrin of the Fox News hosts, who clearly didn't think that through. An audience like that is more likely to help expose her neoliberalism by not applauding her at the right points in her stump speech. Or equally dangerously for Warren, perhaps the recall that Warren may have maneuvered herself out of the political support she now needs when she endorsed Hillary Clinton instead of Bernie Sanders in 2016. And in so doing, Warren clearly abandoned her own talking points, as was pointed out in an article in Paste magazine. It may not be on your newsstand quite now, but it produces some interesting information. This is an article called Elizabeth Warren's Fall from Grace. Throughout the race, Clinton repeatedly chastised Senator Sanders and his supporters as pie in the sky and misguided for backing policies what Warren herself championed. Many progressives felt that Warren's support could have turned Massachusetts in the Vermont senator's favor, if not the primary. Elizabeth Warren is senator from Massachusetts. Supporting Sanders could have produced crucial votes in Massachusetts, perhaps. When it was withheld, progressive voters felt it exposed Warren's fair-weather commitment to those causes. That has hurt both of them, Sanders and Warren. Such were the sentiments expressed by Mary Yates, a Boston resident whose parents had suffered through the Great Recession. She told Paste magazine that while she had originally been impressed with Warren in 2012 for her involvement with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, her lack of endorsement for Sanders was disheartening. Quote, I was terribly disappointed, Yates lamented. I mean, Warren chose not to endorse the candidate that mirrored her financial reform platform, and perhaps her endorsement would have changed everything in Massachusetts' close race. But unfortunately, I believe it's something of Massachusetts culture. In our comfort of being assumed liberal, we tend to stop halfway in progressive battles. Having lived for a quarter of a century in Massachusetts, I think there's a lot of truth in that. Dave Orr, a progressive from Cape Cod, told Paste magazine he was absolutely disgusted. I believe that her endorsement may have put Sanders on top in Massachusetts, he explained. The entire race would have been drastically different. There is a disconnect between what she claims to believe and her actions last year, year before. A lot of people are reacting to that. Close quote. Most registered voters did not vote for Mrs. Clinton in 2016. The number one choice among registered voters was not to vote for U.S. president at all. Add that to the number of voters who voted for any non-Clinton candidate, and that's a clear majority. A clear indication of how Mrs. Clinton did not convince most voters to support her campaign. That's what Warren ultimately backed. Objecting to Senator Warren has nothing to do with bigotry, racism, and outright lies, she maintains, describes Fox News. If Warren will abandon her stated ideas, such as those found in the Senate hearings, which liberals love to crow about when she's railing at some bank CEO, for example, then it almost doesn't matter where she stands on those ideas now, because we can't trust her to stick with those ideas should she get more power to make them real. This is an account of some quite remarkable television discussions of politics in this country now, which doesn't fit the comfortable left-right, liberal, conservative paradigm that they actually want to fit into in order to make sure that the discussion is contained. There is, in spite of Elizabeth Warren's doing her best to be contained, it's perhaps not happening at all. You have been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group, recorded in the studios of Urbana Public Television on May 28th in the 22nd week of 2019. Another week in which the U.S. continues to bomb 8 countries and threaten China, Russia, Venezuela, and Iran. The U.S. government continues to aid the Saudis in their vicious war in Yemen and the Israelis in their racist oppression of the Palestinian people. The Israeli government has murdered protesters at the fence with Gaza, the world's largest open-air prison camp. The U.S. supports that, primarily because Israel is a U.S. stationary aircraft carrier for the U.S. control of Mideast energy, gas, and oil, an American weapon against U.S. economic rivals from Germany to China. Such outrage cannot be dismissed as something that only happens overseas. In the Illinois legislature, local Representative Carol Ammons refused to vote against using University of Illinois funds to support Israeli apartheid, something Ammons would never have done for South African apartheid. On this show, we try to concentrate on the shamefully unreported news of U.S. war-making around the world. We'll conclude today with an interview of Norman Finkelstein, author of the most important books on Zionism in recent years. The interview is it's an episode of Renegade Incorporated about British Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's alleged anti-Semitism and how this allegation is a sham, both on the basis of what Corbyn actually says and how much institutional anti-Semitism actually exists in the United Kingdom. Finkelstein says in this interview, I read the polls, I read the data, it hovers, that is real anti-Semitism in Britain, hovers between 6 and 8%. It's nothing. Well, there are a few crazies, and but there's no institutionalized anti-Semitism in the British Labour Party, which is being consistently charged since Corbyn became head of the British Labour Party. There's no threat of anti-Semitism in British society. I've read all the data, I've studied it closely, it just doesn't exist. It's all being designed and manipulated. I don't believe in conspiracy theories, as you know, but this is a conspiracy. As the interview asks, but there are Jewish people, and you have to recognize them in the UK, who are terribly worried about this. Because ultimately, if this anti-Semitism, which is what you're saying, used for political gain, doesn't work, then real anti-Semitism takes hold, and it's going to be back to the boy that cried wolf, and actually there's no protection. Finkelstein replies, well, there's a bigger problem than that. There's the boy who cried wolf, but there is a bigger problem. If Corbyn loses, a lot of people in the Labour Party are going to blame it on those Jews who fabricated this whole anti-Semitism witch hunt hysteria, and that will be a problem. Finkelstein implies that this is fabricated in part, if not entirely, because of Corbyn's views on Israel. But you know what the bigger problem there is? It's true, Jews were the spearhead of this campaign to stop Corbyn because of the Israeli views. And so there's going to be a lot of anger within the Labour Party. That's not anti-Semitism, that's factually based. You can see the whole interview coming up in a minute or two. Aware on the Air is produced and directed by Jason Liggett and Crofton Coleman, with Andrew Scollery, thanks to whom also this program and others like it will be available on YouTube and archive.org. We rely on our researcher, Jeff Nicholson, whose blog, Digital Citizen, we recommend highly. We steal from it regularly. There's a link to it on our Facebook page. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about, but Americans don't. Assange, Manning, Snowden, and others who are truth-tellers persecuted by the American government, and in particular our liberal senator, our liberal Democrat Senator Durbin, a shill for the Russiagate propaganda, and constitutional attacks on the free press, notably in the case of WikiLeaks. Durbin has a lot to answer for here, and we should be calling on him on these matters more regularly. Now, this is Carl Estabrook for members and friends of AWARE, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, saying in the words of the late newsman Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck.